All over the world, there are ancient places that still confuse historians today. Structures made before writing existed, objects created thousands of years ago, using methods we still do not fully understand. These are not myths or legends. They are real discoveries, found in the ground, studied by archaeologists, and yet still unexplained. Some belong to a time before cities, before temples, before recorded history itself. Tonight, we are exploring several of these ancient mysteries, each one from a different place, each one raising more questions than answers. Here on Sleeping Historian, we take this journey slowly and calmly. You don't need to stay fully focused. You can relax, listen quietly, or even drift off as the stories unfold. And before we begin, if you enjoy peaceful explorations of the ancient past, you're welcome to subscribe. New mysteries are shared every week. Now, let's begin with the discoveries so old it was created before the pyramids, deep in the forests of ancient Eurasia, waiting to be rediscovered. This is not about solving the past, but about listening to it. And sometimes, the most meaningful part of that process is accepting that some mysteries may never be fully explained. Mystery 1. A flood of Hierakonpolis. In the Nile Valley of Egypt, long before the age of pyramids and pharaohs, one of the world's earliest cities was quietly taking shape. This place was Hierakonpolis, a settlement that existed during the pre-dynastic period, roughly between 4000 and 3600 BC, at a time when Egyptian civilization was still forming its earliest foundations. This city had already become a center of power, industry, and belief. Yet beneath its remains lies evidence of a natural disaster so severe that it nearly erased the city from history. Hierakonpolis stood along the Nile, the river that made life in Egypt possible. The land around it was fertile, and the river's yearly floods usually brought renewal, not destruction. These predictable rises in water spread rich silt across the fields, allowing crops to grow and communities to thrive. The people of early Egypt depended on this rhythm. Their homes, workshops, and temples were built with a river in mind. But at some point during this early era, something went terribly wrong. Archaeologists studying the site uncovered thick layers of mud and silt buried deep beneath later buildings. These layers were not the result of normal seasonal flooding. They were far too deep and widespread. Entire structures had been filled, sealed, and abandoned beneath sediment carried by fast-moving water. Walls leaned at unnatural angles. Floors were buried without warning. The evidence pointed to a catastrophic flood, one far beyond anything the people of Hierakonpolis were prepared for. This disaster occurred during a critical stage in the rise of early Egyptian civilization. Hierakonpolis was not a small village. It had grown into a large urban center, with breweries, workshops, ceremonial spaces, and cemeteries spread across the landscape. The settlement played an important role in shaping early political and religious ideas. Some of the most famous artifacts connected to the origins of Egypt were found there, suggesting the city already held great influence before dynastic rule began. When the flood struck, it appears to have arrived suddenly. Archaeologists found everyday objects frozen in place beneath the mud. Tools lay where they had been dropped. Pottery remained unfinished in workshops. In some areas, kilns were discovered still filled with half-fired vessels, as if the people working there had fled without time to return. There were no signs that buildings had been cleared or possessions moved. The water came quickly, leaving no opportunity to prepare. This unexpected disaster created something rare in archaeology, a preserved snapshot of daily life from more than 5,000 years ago. The thick flood deposits sealed the lower layers of the city, protecting fragile materials from decay. Organic remains, tools, and household items survived because they were buried all at once. In destruction, the flood unintentionally became a guardian of history. The cause of the flood remains unknown. The Nile was capable of great force, especially during periods of climate instability. One possibility is extreme rainfall far upstream, sending an overwhelming surge of water down the river. Another explanation suggests shifts in the river's course or changes in regional climate at the end of the 4th millennium BC. Sediment studies show that the water carried heavy loads of silt, consistent with a massive inundation that spread far beyond the usual floodplain. What remains unclear is the human cost. No mass graves have been definitively linked to the flood. There are no written records from this period to describe loss of life or suffering. The people who lived through the disaster left no words behind, only layers of earth that hint at chaos and fear. Whether many lives were lost or whether most managed to escape remains one of the great, unanswered questions. Despite the destruction, Hierakonpolis was not abandoned forever. Above the flood layers, archaeologists found signs of rebuilding. New structures rose on higher ground, suggesting that the people learned from the disaster. The city continued to function, but its layout changed. Important buildings were placed farther from the river, reducing future risk. This shift shows resilience and adaptation at the very beginning of urban life in Egypt. The flood may also have shaped belief. In later Egyptian mythology, creation begins with waters of chaos, from which land emerges. Flooding was seen as both dangerous and sacred, a force that could destroy but also renew. Events like the one at Hierakonpolis may have helped form these ideas. For the people who experienced it, the flood would have been terrifying, but its retreat may have felt like a rebirth of the world. Environmental evidence supports the idea that this period was wetter than today. The Sahara still held grasslands, and storms were stronger and more frequent. The Nile, usually a source of stability, could become unpredictable. Hierakonpolis benefited from fertile conditions, but it also paid the price when nature's balance shifted too far. The flood of Hierakonpolis stands as one of the earliest known natural disasters in the Nile Valley. It is not preserved in legend or myth, but in soil and stone. Its story is written in layers of mud, tilted walls, and buried lives paused in mid-action. It reminds us that even at the dawn of civilization, humans lived at the mercy of forces they could not control. What happened during that flood will never be fully known. The exact trigger remains uncertain. The number of lives affected is lost to time. Yet the evidence is clear enough to show that early Egyptians faced disaster with endurance. They rebuilt, adapted, and continued shaping a civilization that would endure for thousands of years. In this way, the flood of Hierakonpolis is more than a tragedy. It is a turning point, revealing how destruction and renewal were already intertwined at the very beginning of Egyptian history. Mystery 2. The Toluca terracotta head. In the highlands of central Mexico, archaeologists uncovered a discovery that quietly unsettled long-held ideas about the ancient world. The find came from a burial dated to between the 12th and 15th century AD, a period firmly within the pre-Columbian past. The grave belonged to a Mesoamerican culture linked to the Aztec world, and everything about it appeared familiar to researchers, except for one small object that did not seem to belong there at all. Among the offerings placed beside the burial was a terracotta head, roughly the size of a clenched fist. At first glance, it looked unlike any artifact usually associated with ancient Mexico. The face was narrow, the nose sharply defined, and most striking of all, it showed a full beard. In Mesoamerican art, human figures were typically smooth-faced and stylized. Facial hair was almost never shown. This single detail immediately set the object apart. The burial itself was otherwise typical for the region and time. Pottery, textiles, and decorative items were arranged according to local customs. The grave showed no signs of disturbance. Everything suggested the burial had remained sealed since it was first placed in the ground centuries ago. This made the presence of the terracotta head even more puzzling. It did not resemble anything made by known cultures of ancient Mexico. The object was discovered during excavations in the Toluca region in the early 20th century. At the time, it was carefully documented and stored along with other finds. For years, it attracted little attention. Only later, when scholars revisited the records and examined the artifact more closely, did its unusual features become impossible to ignore. The head's appearance seemed closer to Mediterranean styles than to anything from the Americas. The proportions of the face, the realistic modeling, and especially the beard, reminded some researchers of Roman or Hellenistic terracotta figures. These kinds of objects were commonly produced around the Mediterranean world many centuries earlier, not in Mesoamerica and not during the 12th to 15th century AD. This raised a difficult question. If the burial truly dated to the late pre-Columbian period, then how did an object with such foreign characteristics end up inside it? The possibility of later intrusion was considered, but the archaeological context did not support that explanation. The layers of soil showed no signs of being disturbed. The head appeared to have been placed in the grave at the same time as the other offerings. To better understand the artifact, scientists subjected it to testing. Thermoluminescence analysis was used to estimate when the clay had last been fired. The results indicated that the object was indeed ancient, with possible dates ranging broadly from earlier centuries up to the medieval period. While the test confirmed the object was not modern, it could not determine where it had been made. The clay did not clearly match known local sources, nor did it neatly align with known Mediterranean deposits. With testing unable to provide clear answers, researchers turned to interpretation. Several theories emerged, each attempting to explain how such an object could exist in a Mesoamerican burial before European contact. One idea suggested that the head might represent a rare local experiment. Perhaps an indigenous artist created a figure using an unfamiliar style, influenced by stories or images passed along distant trade routes. However, no other examples of similar work have ever been found in the region. Across centuries of excavation, this head remains unique. Another theory proposed that the object arrived through long-distance movement, carried unknowingly across the ocean. Supporters of this view pointed to the vastness of the seas and the possibility of accidental drift. Ships lost at sea could, in theory, have reached distant shores. Yet this explanation raises more questions than it answers. No additional evidence of such contact exists in Mesoamerica from this period. Some researchers suggested that the resemblance to Mediterranean art might be misleading. Human faces share basic features, and it is possible that similarities emerged by coincidence. Still, the beard remains difficult to explain. In the artistic traditions of ancient Mexico, facial hair was almost entirely absent. This makes coincidence harder to accept. The location of the find adds another layer to the mystery. The Toluca Valley sat along important trade routes within central Mexico. Merchants known for traveling long distances exchanged goods such as obsidian, salt, and luxury items. Rare objects could travel far from their place of origin. But even within these networks, nothing else like the terracotta head has ever appeared. What makes this mystery especially compelling is that it refuses to settle into a comfortable explanation. If the head was foreign, it suggests contact that history does not currently recognize. If it was local, it challenges everything known about artistic conventions in Mesoamerica. Either way, it does not fit neatly into existing frameworks. The artifact offers no clues of its own. There are no inscriptions, no markings that explain its purpose or origin. It is silent, giving nothing away. Its presence in a carefully arranged burial suggests it held meaning to the people who placed it there, even if that meaning is now lost. Today, the Toluca terracotta head remains one of the most debated small objects in archaeology. It does not prove ancient transoceanic contact, but it also cannot be dismissed as an error or fabrication. It exists in a narrow space between certainty and speculation. As with many ancient mysteries, the most honest conclusion is uncertainty. The origin of the head is unknown. The path it traveled, if any, is unclear. Its role within the burial remains a mystery. What it does offer is a reminder that the past still holds surprises, and that even a single small object can raise questions large enough to challenge accepted history. The terracotta face from central Mexico continues to stare outward across time, unchanged, unresolved, and quietly waiting for answers that may never fully arrive. Mystery 3. The Chachapoya Sky Flame. In the cloud forests of northern Peru, high along the eastern slopes of the Andes, there once lived a people known as the Chachapoya. Their world existed between the mountains and the rainforest, where thick mist often covered the landscape and weather could change without warning. From around 800 to 1400 AD, the Chachapoya built stone settlements along ridges and cliffs, creating a culture shaped by isolation, height, and the sky above them. Later societies would remember them as the people of the clouds. Their homes were placed high above valleys, their tombs carved into sheer rock faces, and their ceremonial spaces woven into the natural terrain. Life in this region required close attention to the environment. The sky, the mountains, and the forests were not distant features. They were active forces that shaped belief, survival, and memory. Among the stories connected to the Chachapoya is one account that stands apart from architecture and artifacts. It is the memory of a fire in the sky, an event so striking that it remained alive in oral tradition long after it happened. Unlike myths that describe gods or creation, this story was remembered as something witnessed, an extraordinary moment that interrupted the normal order of the world. The account comes to us through later chronicles, recorded after the Chachapoya had already been absorbed into larger empires. These written sources describe how people spoke of a brilliant flame moving across the heavens. The sky was said to light up suddenly, as if day had returned in the middle of night. Some versions mention noise, others speak of fear and confusion. The event was not described as symbolic, it was remembered as real. For a society deeply connected to the natural world, such a sight would have carried powerful meaning. The Chachapoya lived in a time when signs in the sky were closely watched. Celestial movements were not ignored. Unusual lights or sounds overhead would not have been dismissed as coincidence. They were seen as messages or warnings, events that demanded attention. The story of the sky flame was passed down through generations, preserved through spoken memory until it was eventually written by outsiders. This survival alone makes it unusual. Many oral traditions fade or change beyond recognition, yet this one remained clear enough to be recorded centuries later as an event, not a legend. Modern researchers have tried to understand what the Chachapoya may have witnessed. Several scientific explanations have been proposed, each grounded in known natural phenomena. One possibility is a meteor. Large meteors entering Earth's atmosphere can produce intense light, loud explosions, and shockwaves. They can turn night into day for a few moments and leave lasting impressions on anyone who sees them. Another explanation is a comet. Bright comets can appear suddenly and remain visible for days or even weeks. In many cultures, comets were remembered as fiery visitors in the sky. Their glowing tails and slow movement made them especially noticeable, and they were often associated with change or danger. A third possibility is an atmospheric explosion. Events like this occur when objects break apart in the atmosphere without reaching the ground. These explosions can release enormous energy, producing flashes of light and sound that travel across wide areas. Even in modern times, such events have caused panic and confusion among those who witness them. The geography of the Chachapoya region makes all of these explanations plausible. The high elevation provides clear views of the sky. Thin air can make lights appear brighter and closer. At night, away from artificial light, even a single event would stand out sharply against darkness. For people living in cloud forests, where mist often hides the stars, a sudden blaze above would have felt even more dramatic. What makes this mystery especially compelling is the way it was remembered. The account was not tied to a specific god or ritual. It was not explained away through mythology. Instead, it was described as something that happened. This gives it a different weight compared to symbolic stories. It suggests the Chachapoya were careful observers of their environment, capable of preserving memory without fully understanding the cause. Archaeology provides additional context. Chachapoya settlements often included ceremonial areas and spaces linked to ritual activity. Their architecture shows planning and cooperation. Stone walls, circular buildings, and cliffside tombs required shared effort and organization. This was not a culture detached from reflection or meaning. Events that disrupted the sky would naturally become part of communal memory. The chronicles that mention the sky flame were written long after the event itself. They were recorded by people from different cultures viewing the past through their own beliefs. Even so, the core of the story remained consistent. There was light, there was fire, there was fear, and there was remembrance. Over time, the Chachapoya culture itself faded. Their cities were overtaken by forest. Their political independence ended. Much of their history was lost or absorbed into other traditions. Yet the memory of the sky flame endured, carried quietly through generations until it reached the written record. Today, there is no physical trace of the event. No crater has been identified. No material evidence remains. What survives is memory alone. This places the mystery in a space between science and history, where interpretation depends on both natural explanation and human experience. The sky flame of the Chachapoya remains unresolved. It may have been a meteor, a comet, or an atmospheric explosion. Each explanation fits within what is scientifically possible. None can be proven with certainty. What is clear is that something extraordinary happened between 800 and 1400 AD, and that it mattered deeply to the people who saw it. In the end, the story reminds us that ancient cultures were not passive or unaware. They watched the world closely. They remembered what moved them, and sometimes, even without tools or written language, they preserved moments that still reach across centuries, waiting to be understood. Mystery 4. The Marcahuasi Plateau. High in the Andes Mountains of Peru, there is a broad plateau that feels removed from the modern world. Wind moves freely across its surface, clouds pass quickly overhead, and the land itself appears silent and still. This place is known as the Marcahuasi or Marcahuasi Plateau, and for many years it has drawn quiet attention from researchers, travelers, and local communities. The reason is not hidden ruins or standing temples, but the rock itself. The plateau belongs to a pre-Inca era, though its exact age remains uncertain. No clear dates can be assigned to its most unusual features, and that uncertainty is part of what makes the site so difficult to understand. The ground here is made primarily of volcanic tuff, a soft stone formed long ago from layers of compacted volcanic ash. Over immense spans of time, this material can be shaped by wind, rain, and temperature into unexpected forms. Scattered across the plateau are large stone shapes that appear strangely familiar. Some resemble human faces, complete with brows, noses, and mouths. Others look like animals, frozen in place within the rock. Depending on where one stands, a cliff might suggest a profile staring into the distance, while another angle causes the image to vanish entirely. Light and shadow play an important role, changing the appearance of these forms throughout the day. Among the most discussed features is a rock face often called the Monument to Humanity. This formation appears to show multiple human profiles aligned along a single cliff. Some faces seem large, others smaller, as if representing different ages or types of people. When the sun strikes the stone directly, the illusion becomes strong and difficult to ignore. When shadows move across it, the shapes soften and blend back into the rock. At first glance, these formations feel intentional, as if carved by human hands. Yet no clear tool marks have been identified. This is where the debate begins. Geologists who study the plateau point to natural erosion as the primary explanation. Volcanic tuff fractures easily, and over time, cracks, joints, and layers can break in ways that produce rounded and angular shapes. Wind and water then continue the process, slowly shaping surfaces into forms that can appear meaningful to the human eye. This explanation is supported by similar formations found in other volcanic regions around the world. Nature is capable of producing shapes that resemble faces and animals without any human involvement. The human brain is especially skilled at finding patterns, even where none were intended. This tendency, known as visual interpretation, can make random forms seem purposeful. Yet archaeology adds another layer to the discussion. The Marcahuasi Plateau is not an empty place. Evidence of ancient human activity exists in the surrounding region. Stone structures, terraces, and traces of occupation suggest that people lived nearby long before the Inca period. These communities would have known the plateau well. They would have seen the shapes in the rock, just as visitors do today. This raises an important question. Even if the formations began as natural features, did humans later modify them? In many Andean cultures, natural landscapes held spiritual meaning. Mountains, stones, and cliffs were not viewed as lifeless objects, but as powerful beings. People often enhanced existing natural shapes to emphasize their symbolic importance. Sometimes this involved carving small details or creating ritual spaces nearby, rather than reshaping the entire formation. At Marcahuasi, the extent of any such human alteration remains unknown. No clear evidence proves that the faces or animals were deliberately carved. At the same time, it is difficult to believe that ancient people would ignore such striking natural forms. The plateau's high elevation and wide views of the surrounding mountains would have made it a natural place for ritual or observation. The possible ritual significance of the site is another unresolved question. Elevated places often held special importance in Andean belief systems. They were closer to the sky and the forces thought to reside there. Ceremonies connected to seasons, celestial events, or community identity frequently took place in such locations. If the rock formations were seen as representations of ancestors, spirits, or protective beings, the plateau may have served as a sacred landscape rather than a constructed monument. Some researchers suggest that even minimal human involvement could have changed how the site was perceived. Clearing pathways, arranging stones, or using the plateau during ceremonies would have strengthened its meaning without leaving obvious archaeological traces. Over centuries, erosion would erase subtle modifications, leaving behind only the ambiguous shapes visible today. This is where the mystery of Marcahuasi remains balanced between two explanations. On one side is geology, offering a clear and natural process capable of shaping volcanic tuff into familiar forms. On the other is culture, reminding us that humans have long interacted with their environments in symbolic ways. The two explanations do not cancel each other out. Instead, they exist together. The plateau may represent a place where nature and human belief intersected. The formations could be entirely natural, yet still deeply meaningful to those who lived nearby. Or they may have been gently altered, guided rather than carved, shaped as much by perception as by tools. What makes Marcahuasi unusual is not just how it looks, but how it resists certainty. There is no final answer waiting beneath the stone. The question is not simply whether humans carved the faces, but how ancient people understood and used the landscape around them. Today, the plateau remains quiet. Wind continues to move across the volcanic surface. Light shifts, changing what the eye perceives. Faces appear, then fade. Animals emerge, then dissolve back into rock. The dual nature of the site remains unresolved. Marcahuasi stands as a reminder that not all ancient mysteries are built from blocks or written in symbols. Some exist in the space between geology and belief, where nature creates and humans interpret. And sometimes the most enduring mystery is not what was done, but how it was seen. Mystery 5. The Shigir Idol. Deep within the Ural Mountains of central Russia, a quiet discovery reshaped how we think about the earliest chapters of human history. Long before cities, writing, or monumental stone buildings, people were already creating objects of great size and deep meaning. One such object is known today as the Shigir Idol, a wooden figure that has survived against all odds for nearly 12,000 years. The idol belongs to the Mesolithic era, a time when the world was emerging from the last ice age. Forests were spreading across northern Eurasia, animals were returning to new habitats, and human societies lived as hunter-gatherers, moving through the landscape in small groups. These people are often imagined as focused only on survival, yet the Shigir idol tells a far more complex story. The discovery of the idol was completely accidental. In the late 19th century, workers extracting peat from a bog in the Ural region uncovered fragments of carved wood buried deep in the wet soil. At first, no one understood what they had found. Only later, when the pieces were cleaned and studied, did it become clear that they belonged to a single towering figure carved from a single tree trunk. When fully assembled, the idol stood more than 5 meters tall. It was not made from separate parts, but shaped from one massive piece of wood using stone tools. This alone required careful planning and skill. The tree chosen was old and large, suggesting deliberate selection rather than chance. Shaping such a trunk would have taken time, effort, and shared knowledge. What truly sets the Shigir idol apart is its surface. The wood is covered with complex geometric patterns carved deeply into the surface. Straight lines, zigzags, and repeating shapes run from top to bottom in a clear and intentional order. These are not random decorations. They appear planned, measured, and symbolic. Along the length of the idol are 7 carved faces, stacked vertically one above the other. Each face is stylized but clearly human. The eyes are wide, the expressions calm, and the forms consistent. They look outward, as if watching the world around them. No two faces are exactly the same, yet they belong to a shared design. When the idol was first dated, scientists believed it to be around 9,000 years old. Later analysis pushed the age even further back to approximately 12,000 years ago. This made it the oldest known monumental wooden sculpture ever discovered. It is far older than Stonehenge and thousands of years older than the pyramids of Egypt. This age forced researchers to rethink long-held assumptions. During the Mesolithic period, there were no cities, no temples, and no permanent stone monuments. People lived in mobile communities, following animals and seasonal resources. And yet, here was a massive monument that required long-term effort, shared ideas, and advanced craftsmanship. The meaning of the idol's symbols remains unknown. The geometric patterns may represent stories, beliefs, or instructions passed down through generations. Some researchers suggest the shapes divide the figure into sections, possibly representing different realms or levels of existence. Others believe the lines may encode myths or spiritual knowledge now lost. The purpose of the idol is equally uncertain. One possibility is that it represented a deity, a powerful being connected to nature or the spirit world. Another idea is that it reflected a cosmology, a way of understanding how the universe was structured. Some scholars think it may have served as a boundary marker, placed to mark sacred land or a gathering space. What makes these questions even more difficult is the lack of comparison. No other object from this period matches the Shigir idol in size, detail, or complexity. Without written records or similar monuments, interpretation remains open. Every theory is based on patterns, not proof. The effort invested in creating the idol raises another mystery. Why would hunter-gatherer societies, without permanent settlements, dedicate so much time and energy to a single object? The answer may lie in social or spiritual importance. The idol could have served as a focal point for seasonal gatherings, rituals, or shared identity among different groups. The location where it once stood would have looked very different from today. The landscape was still changing after the Ice Age, with shifting forests and waterways. A tall wooden figure would have stood out clearly, visible from far away. It would have shaped how people experienced the land around them. The idol's survival is as remarkable as its creation. Wood usually decays quickly, but the Shigir idol was preserved because it fell into a peat bog. The waterlogged, oxygen-poor environment slowed decay, protecting the wood for thousands of years. Without this natural preservation, the idol would have vanished completely. Even today, the Shigir idol resists simple explanation. Its symbols remain unread, its role uncertain, and its creators anonymous. What it proves, without doubt, is that early humans were capable of deep, abstract thought long before the rise of civilization, as we usually define it. The Shigir idol stands at the edge of history, carved by people who left no names and no words behind. It reminds us that meaning, belief, and creativity existed long before stone cities or written language. And as its carved faces continue to look outward across time, the questions they raise remain unanswered, quiet, enduring, and deeply human. As the journey comes to a close, the pace begins to soften. There is no sudden conclusion and no final declaration. Instead, the story slowly eases forward, allowing the weight of what has been explored to settle naturally. The sense of discovery remains, but the intensity gently fades, making space for quiet reflection. What stands out most at this point is not what has been solved, but what remains unanswered. Each mystery we've encountered still holds gaps where certainty should be. The absence of clear conclusions is not treated as a failure, but as a reminder that some parts of the past were never meant to be fully recovered. Time has a way of keeping its secrets, no matter how carefully we search. The stories explored here do not end with explanations neatly tied together. They remain open, unfinished, and unresolved. That endurance is part of their power. Long after names, languages, and entire cultures disappeared, these mysteries continued to exist. They survived erosion, decay, and forgetting. Even now, they resist simple answers. As the intensity fades, the focus shifts away from facts and toward meaning. These mysteries remind us that knowledge has limits. No matter how advanced our tools become or how detailed our research grows, there will always be moments where the past remains just beyond reach. Some questions can be studied forever without yielding final answers. Yet it is within that uncertainty that something deeply human appears. Curiosity does not disappear when answers are missing. Instead, it grows stronger. Across generations, people have wondered about the same unknowns. They looked at the same landscapes, the same artifacts, and the same traces left behind, asking similar questions in different times. This shared curiosity connects us to those who came before us, The ancient builders, artists, and observers may never have imagined how far their actions would echo into the future. Still, their creations continue to invite attention, thought, and wonder. The mysteries they left behind are not barriers, but bridges between distant lives and our own. Rather than offering closure, the ending allows the questions to remain where they belong: open, unfinished, alive. The goal is not to force meaning where none is certain, but to appreciate the quiet presence of mystery itself. Sometimes, understanding is not about reaching the end, but about staying with the question. As the journey slows, there is a sense of calm acceptance. Not everything needs to be solved to be meaningful. Some stories exist simply to remind us how vast and layered human history truly is. The silence left by unanswered questions is not empty. It is full of possibility. If you've enjoyed traveling through these ancient mysteries, there is an invitation to continue. Click the video on screen to move into another story from this series, where new questions and forgotten worlds are waiting to be explored. Here on Sleeping Historian, the journey never truly ends. It only pauses, ready to begin again whenever curiosity returns. For now, thank you for being part of this quiet exploration. And as you rest, reflect, or drift onward, stay curious.